Welcome back to our study in the letters that John wrote. We are in the second chapter of the first letter that John wrote, and we've been studying a little bit about what it means to be a Christian and how people know we're a Christian, and that the basic tenet of that is that we love each other and that we care about each other and we display a Christ-like attitude and actions in everything we do. We don't just say, I'm a Christian, and walk away from it. Lip service isn't enough. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't tell people you're a Christian, but if you're going to say that, you need to live it behind it. And that's what John's saying in a lot of this. And so we're going to pick up in verse 7, and it says this, Beloved, I am not writing a new commandment to you, but an old commandment which you have had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which you have heard. Now, what's he talking about there? Well, he's saying the commandment that Jesus gave us, and we looked at this a little earlier in our studies, especially in John chapter 15, about loving one another even as I love you, and things like this, Jesus speaking to his disciples. That process of love, which is an action that's backed up in our language too, but we do our love by how we participate in each other's lives in a caring way that supports those and gives value to life in general, basically. And he's saying to them, I love you, and you love everyone else that way too, especially those of the faith. And we always see this little concentration. But he's now saying this isn't just new with Jesus, even though Jesus said it, okay? It goes all the way back to the Old Testament. We can go back to Exodus chapter 20, and we can see very clearly where he is talking about loving one another, loving your neighbor as yourself, loving the Lord your God with all your heart. As we see these commandments being issued in their original state from Moses up on Mount Sinai. And all of this comes together to show us that this isn't a new thing that God wants us to do, but as Christians, it is a continued practice that reflects who Jesus is in our lives. Then in verse 8 he says, On the other hand, I am writing a new commandment to you, which is true in him and you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. Wow, there's a lot here. If we read Mark chapter 12, verse 30, Jesus is responding when he's been asked what's the greatest commandment. He says it's to love the Lord your God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself, which is actually two commandments, but he puts them together into one. And that's very important to understand the context of this. He says Jesus is bringing this together in a way that the Christian lifestyle reflects God and then Jesus in you. And he says this is because Christ has just come, and it's a new light. The darkness of the old covenant and that overhanging performance that was needed to remind people of their faith is gone. It was fading at this time in the early church because Christ's light was blossoming out. And what we see is in the Old Testament, the children of Israel did their works so that their faith would be stimulated. And that's why there was all the liturgical practices that we see instituted in the first 5 books of the Bible, called the Torah or the Law or the books of Moses. But in the New Testament, our faith produces the works. So the light of Christ that we accept into our hearts through salvation will motivate us to do the right works. And that means we love each other and we love one another. We'll pick up there in our next session.